the White House is still talking about how it's, it's going to happen. The disarmament, Hamas is just eventually going to surrender and give over all of their weapons, and they're on course for that. I mean, it's
Yeah. Steve Witkoff said on 60 Minutes, he said that they're going to do a buyback plan for the guns like they do in the US, where they give you like soccer tickets for
they do.
giving in your guns. I mean, it's just, these are not serious people.
Colonial fantasy.
Yeah. They're not serious people.
No.
They don't understand what they're talking about.
Right. Yeah. No.
But it's heading for some sort of crisis, because they have said we're going to do this and Trump has signed his name on it. So I want to get more into that, because I think what John has just done is shown us what happens when you conceive of a plan on the back of a napkin without any regard for the reality on the ground, where the population is, and so on. And politically speaking, it's the same. I mean, we talked in recent weeks about Trump's 20-point plan, which he obviously thought was very good. The fact that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and Steve Witkoff, two real estate tycoons who are also committed Zionists, were the ones conceiving, formulating, and negotiating these details, has led to a point where now they are making it up as they go along in some really crucial ways.
But just to say that what was signed in Sharm el-Sheikh is not disarmament. They signed on the first, the only thing that Qassam and Hamas agreed to was the first part, what we're seeing right now. There's no signatures of anyone. When you saw that performative signature signing, that was not on all 20 points. That was only on the initial points, which are Israeli withdrawal, return of the captives, those and aid coming in. The second stage has not been negotiated yet, and from Hamas's perspective, they're not going to sign a disarmament agreement. So I just wanted to say that that's separate from what you saw, the scrawled signatures in that performance in Sharm el-Sheikh is not signed related to disarmament. That comes next.
Well, that's an important reminder, John, and that's the way you see it. That's the way I see it. I'm sure that's the way most reasonable people see it, but that's not the way the United States and its allies, and certainly the Israelis, are proceeding. They are proceeding as if the commitment to disarmament, and Trump has said this repeatedly when challenged on this, they've agreed to do it. They said they'd do it. Right. You're pointing out correctly, they never said they'd do it. But they are acting as if they are, and that's where I think the real danger lies. So why don't we get into some of these headlines and stories that show sort of this train speeding towards a cliff edge, at least the way I see it, and then we can get what people's thoughts are. So, I mean, one of the key headlines in the Israeli press and also in the US press is this idea of the US becoming more closely involved than ever in direct micromanagement of what Israel is doing. If we look at this headline from CNN, we can see the headline there: Trump's babysitting of Netanyahu puts the US in charge on Gaza. And the term they're actually using is babysitting, using Netanyahu's nickname. And they say an American official called it babysitting, a revolving door of the highest-ranking members of the Trump administration to make sure Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, frequently known as Bibi, sticks to the U.S. brokered ceasefire deal. And then they quote Vice President J.D. Vance, who has just returned from there. He says, quote, "We intend to stay engaged every single day to make sure peace takes hold," Vance said at a news conference. Unveiling a new U.S. coordination center to monitor and assess real-time developments of the Gaza ceasefire. And they say the event is being managed by an external... and then you have former Israeli Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot saying the event, meaning the ceasefire, is being managed by an external entity, by the Americans, and this is a very problematic matter, Eisenkot told Israeli radio Khan. Quote, as we progress with the agreement, more international forces will enter, and this will limit the IDF. So you can see where the Israeli fears are about this so-called international stabilization force, which an American general is trying to put together. So, but, what is the plan? It's not clear. Let's look at the next headline tomorrow, which is from the New York Times just earlier this week. The headline, nations hesitate to send troops to Gaza, fearing clashes with Hamas. And this article says that the ceasefire that came into force last week rests on some key assumptions. I think that's important to underline that Hamas militants give up their weapons and that an international troop presence keeps the peace as Israel withdraws its military from the enclave. But the countries that might make up that force are skittish about committing soldiers who could potentially come into direct conflict with Hamas while it is still an armed group, diplomats and other people familiar with the deliberations say. And then they say also that there has been little progress on when the force might be assembled because of confusion over the force's mission, which appears to be the most serious stumbling block. Are these just observers? Are they peacekeepers? Or are they going to go out and fight Hamas? That's not clear. The New York Times says their main concern is that their troops, meaning these potential participant countries, should not be expected to fight Hamas militants, some of whom remain heavily armed, on Israel's behalf. For several of the countries, that prospect alone would be reason enough to back out of it, the officials said. Then they say a Turkish government statement stated that President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said that Turkey would join a task force that it described as overseeing the ceasefire. It was unclear whether he was referring directly to the stabilization force. Some in Israel's leadership are likely to be skeptical about Turkey playing a role. We'll come back to that too. Yeah. President Prabowo Subianto, this is still in the New York Times, of Indonesia, said during a speech at the United Nations last month that his country was ready to deploy 20,000 or more troops, quote, to help secure peace in Gaza and other war zones. Now, this is still in the same New York Times article. They say, asked about how Hamas would disarm, Jared Kushner, Mr. Trump's son-in-law and one of the architects of the ceasefire, told CBS's 60 Minutes last week, quote, so in order for that to occur, we need to create the International Stabilization Force, and then the International Stabilization Force needs to create a local Palestinian government. So this is a bunch of pie in the sky at this point. Because how are they going to do that? They're not going to be able to go in and create a government against the wish, a collaborator government, which is the word that is not stated, but is clearly what's meant.
Does this mean that Blair is, where's Blair?
He's not mentioned anymore. We haven't seen Tony Blair or the Board of Peace. Right. Talk of the Board of Peace seems to have dropped out for now too.
And also, just to note before we go on, the troops that will get shot at, they'll be shot at by Israel. If we look at any peacekeeping mission anywhere near Israel, the main the person shooting at them in Lebanon, it's the Israelis.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't seem to be of concern to Kushner.
But the point of these things is that they haven't even talked about them. Kushner and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 were on 60 Minutes on Sunday night, and they were pressed on questions, and they just these things don't exist. They were not part of the conversations of the ceasefire, and it's all basically based around Kushner and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 making phone calls to the leaders of the Gulf states. There's no piece of paper that says this is the blueprint for what it would look like. So they're just calling these the heads of these governments, and that's why he said that they were successful, is because their business contacts let them have direct lines into the leaders of these countries, and they phone them and say, would you put up some troops? But they don't say, here's the blueprint, here's what it looks like. So it's just the whole thing is very Trump.
Yeah, but there is still quite a, it's more than just words, because as I mentioned, the Americans are putting significant numbers of people on the ground, albeit in Israel, which is unprecedented because Israel has always rejected having a direct US military presence, with some small exceptions, like, for example, manning Patriot or THAAD batteries, which is sort of a technical role. But this shows the extent to which Israel is more and more dependent on the US and really a vassal of the US, where the US is directly in charge. So we have in the next article, Tamara, from Ynet, the headline there is Netanyahu draws red line against Turkish troops in Gaza. I'll say more about that, but that's not what I wanted to get from this article. This article says that the US has established an international command center in the Kiryat Gat industrial zone, that's inside Israel, staffed by about 200 American troops alongside representatives from Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, Denmark, and Germany. Vice President Vance visited the base, where a press conference was held under Israeli and American flags in the presence of US and British generals. Behind the podium stood large signs reading Trump's 20-point plan for Gaza. So again, this shows, I mean, you are right, John, to point out that all of this poses real questions for Palestinian sovereignty, but also Israeli sovereignty. Here we see now the pretense of Israel as an independent state, the mask torn off that. It is an extension of these imperial states and, one of the vassals, along with Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, and Germany, the other countries mentioned there, who are all, in my opinion, on a par, however you want to interpret that the UAE and Jordan are as great as Germany. Maybe you could interpret it that way.
Some of the terms that Vance at this visit yesterday that Vance had in Israel is that he said that we don't want to be a protectorate. We don't want Israel to be a vassal state. We don't want Israel to be a client state. He's kind of like saying all the things.
Yeah, but you don't say
And
that
then-
unless that's the
Exactly.
reality.
Don't think of an elephant. Do
And
not think of an elephant. Yeah.
He also said, I'm not here to monitor a toddler.
Sounds like that's what he's there to do. But on the point of let's go to the next piece, Tamara. Again, this is interesting. This appeared this morning from the New York Times. Vance says international security force will take lead on disarming Gaza. Well, that's very interesting. And they say that but he said, and it doesn't give any details about that, what that would look like. And they say that the US, big believer in the United Nations, by the way, US always huge supporter of the UN, may actually seek a UN Security Council mandate for this force.
Oh, wow.
And they say here in the New York Times article that in remarks to reporters, Mr. Vance cautioned that the task of disarming Hamas, which the militant group has long opposed, was, quote, going to take some time, and it's going to depend a lot on the composition of that force. So two things in there. Because these are fresh comments. Two things are hidden, or maybe not so hidden, in that statement. One is a recognition that this is not something that they can just do anytime soon, and the other is an admission that they don't have a force yet. They don't know what that force is going to look like. We mentioned earlier that Turkey had said it would send forces, and I alluded that Netanyahu has rejected that. If we look at the next story from the Times of Israel, Tamara, which you have there, and this reports comments allegedly made by Netanyahu in his talks with Vance and other US officials. The headline there, Netanyahu said to insist PA have no role in Gaza as US pushes Trump plan to end war. Now, it says that one of the things not new is that Israel doesn't want the Palestinian Authority back in Gaza. But it says that Netanyahu also spelt out three other red lines to the Americans. One, no Turkish presence in Gaza. Um, Neither the Palestinian Authority nor Hamas playing any governing role the day after the war. It's interesting that they're talking about the day after being at some time in the future.
Right.
Presumably, this should already be the day after, but the day after is still to come. And the third, that Netanyahu is said to have insisted that a full IDF withdrawal would only take place after Hamas is fully disarmed and the Strip demilitarized. So you can see there the huge minefields that are being set up by the so-called Trump plan, where Israel is just going to dig in and say that as long as there is a single rifle in Gaza, we're staying forever. So this is setting us up for uh, a lot of trouble in the future. Now, just two more short items on this. So we've ruled out Turkey because Israel says no Turkey, right? They can't come in. The Arab states, Jordan, Egypt. I mean, it's not even a week ago that we were told that Egypt would be the leading force in the stabilization force. The name of Egypt has disappeared. Jordan and the UAE aren't being mentioned anymore. They were mentioned earlier on. So who could it be? Well, according to Israel Hayom, the very right-wing Israeli newspaper, and is it still owned by Miriam Adelson?
I think so.
Asa?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is still owned by uh, Miriam Adelson. As of this morning,
Yeah, it
according
is.
to Israel Hayom, troops from Azerbaijan and Indonesia are expected to form the core of the International Stabilization Force to be deployed in Gaza. Now, where this is coming from, I don't know. They just seem to be pulling new names out of the hat every day. One thing that can be said about Azerbaijan is it is a very close ally of Israel and of Turkey, by the way. Azerbaijan is the main supplier of oil to Israel. About 30% of Israel's oil imports come from Azerbaijan through the BTC pipeline across Turkish territory, which Turkey has never shut down. So this is the fuel that fuels the Israeli jets, the tanks, the bulldozers that committed this genocide in Gaza. I don't know if Azerbaijan has agreed to this, but that's the latest. And of course, Indonesia, that seems to be, their name seems to come up a lot in terms of acting as kind of like, the Muslim country that will do Israel's bidding. They were talked about as a dumping ground for Palestinians expelled from Gaza, and now they're being talked about as coming in to do Israel's dirty work. But neither Indonesia nor Azerbaijan are going to disarm Hamas. And the final item, I don't know, John, do you want to say something about that
No,
before
none
we
of
do
them
the
are
final
going to
piece?
disarm Hamas. Israel, we just watched them spend 700 days fully backed by literally $30 billion in US weaponry that was delivered daily by plane, by ship. They were unable to do that. They've killed unknown number of Gaza's population, but more than 12% killed, arrested, or maimed. And they there's no other force that's going in to do this. The only force that would fail as well. There's nothing, even the Americans, there's nothing American soldiers have that Israeli soldiers don't have. So there's no thing where the Americans go into Gaza.
And they've
Um,
ruled that out.
yeah,
Vance ruled that out again. Both Trump and Vance have said no U.S. troops will be going into Gaza.
yeah, you're not disarming them. That's just not that.
Yeah.
700 days. Like, we have a lot of evidence that Israel cannot do that. And even their last operations, they were not fighting the resistance. They said specifically, we're fighting infrastructure. because they're not fighting the resistance. There was a security assessment released in Israel yesterday that talks about 20,000 𝐤𝐿 fighters, which is, according to some estimates, there was only 26,000 going into the war. I would have put the number higher, closer to 40,000, but yeah, they're talking about, the Israelis themselves talking about 20,000 𝐤𝐿 fighters. So
Mm.
this is
And
just,
and you know,
it's
if
just not
this were to
serious.
happen,
It's
if
just not serious. I
yeah,
don't. Yeah.
even if an international force were to go in, right, uh, and they managed to cobble something together and even get it a UN mandate, I think that the resistance would be extremely reluctant and would avoid, as far as it could to fire a shot at them. Okay, they would not want to fight with them, but the point is they wouldn't have to, because none of these soldiers are not gonna, this international force are not gonna start going down tunnels and trying to destroy the resistance. So the resistance would just be there, and they would continue to be in effective control, and these guys would just, I don't know, be doing traffic patrols or
Yeah.
doing
Well,
the type
𝐸𝐿's
of,
already out doing traffic patrols. They did that immediately. As soon as the ceasefire came, they're out in the streets, looking after the society.
yeah, yeah, I'm just saying they might even let them come in.
Yeah, they'd
You know,
welcome.
the Hamas might even let a force come in and say, yeah, sure, you can stand around, maybe you can help, I don't know, escort aid I don't know, they could find something to do with them, but the point is that the resistance will still be there, and nobody's going to be able to build an alternative to indigenous Palestinian governance against the will of the resistance and the people in Gaza. But my fear is this is where I fear this is all heading, and that is that the inability, the fact that Hamas and the resistance haven't agreed to disarm, that there is no way to do it by force. The default is going to be maintaining the siege and the blockade, as they
Mhm.
have done after every single war, except now the situation in Gaza is much worse. So to continue to starve and punish the civilian population in order to try to force concessions from the resistance, that is my fear. And what we see, on the one hand, we see all these stories about US micromanaging of the situation, effectively telling the Israelis what they can and can't do, and telling them to knock it off when they did that massacre last Sunday in Gaza. But at the same time, the Americans are not telling the Israelis to open the crossings and let in the 6,000 trucks that UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, says are waiting now on the frontiers of Gaza. And why aren't the Americans doing that? Because I think they are going to continue to use aid, food, medicine, formula for babies as their weapon of choice, and really their only weapon, because they don't have any others.
Yeah.
And so this is why we have to be extremely aware that this war, this genocide against the people in Gaza is not over by any means. They are just going from bombs to baby bottles as their weapons.
And just to be clear, 𝐸𝐿, the resistance has been very clear all throughout the years, not just this genocide, that foreign force will be considered an occupier. They have been very clear on that. They have never been the ones to say we want a foreign protection force when that was a suggestion over the course of years. They're not. They don't want a foreign force. They consider that an occupying force as well. So for this to happen, they would have to change a long held, very clear position on this. And I just think that Trump doesn't know that. And Kushner doesn't know that. And they didn't even bring like their Arabists, or something like that. They didn't bring their cartographers. They just made these phone calls in rooms. They talked about it, Kushner, Witkoff, and Ron Dermer the three of them sitting in a room and picking up the phone and calling this leader and that leader. I don't think they don't have the capacity or the seriousness to look at the details of how to execute this. They didn't bring in State Department people, right? They hate the State Department people. So they don't have anything that resembles a professionalized accounting of what needs to be done and how that would be put into place.
Precisely.
So, yeah. So just one last item, which is the other element, which we haven't talked about much today, is the West Bank, which Israel is moving to annex, and they held a vote on that. I mean, just sort of a preliminary vote in the Knesset. And Trump said, and we're going to hear J.D. Vance in a moment, that Israel will not annex the West Bank. And I think that is a nod to the the Arab Gulf and other Arab regimes involved in this, for whom that's important, because they're very committed, the Arab states, to the so-called two-state solution, which they see as the only way of preserving Israel, something that they're very committed to as allies of Israel. And so we know that Trump and the far right have never been committed to a two-state solution, but they do seem to be now making that nod with these comments against Israeli moves to annex the West Bank. Let's watch J.D. Vance's statement in the last few hours.
About it. Somebody told me that it was a political stunt, that it had no practical significance. It was purely symbolic. I mean, look, if it was a political stunt, it was a very stupid political stunt, and I personally take some insult to it. The West Bank is not going to be annexed by Israel. The policy of the Trump administration is that the West Bank will not be annexed by Israel. That will continue to be our policy. And if people want to take symbolic votes, they can do that. But we certainly weren't happy about it.
And what's interesting about that, Tamara, if you can show the tweet again. This was actually put out by the White House's official rapid response account. So they wanted people to hear this message that J.D. Vance had given. And when he said it was a stupid move, it was a political stunt, he was talking about that vote in the Knesset. So just, it's interesting. We have not heard language as strong as this from the Trump administration before about annexation. And if Miriam Adelson's $100 million was meant to pay Trump to approve the annexation of the rest of the West Bank, just as he approved the annexation of East Jerusalem and of the Golan Heights, then she may be wanting her money back. But we'll see how long they stick to this position.
Yeah, and the other vote that was passed, I think I mentioned this in the report, was the also annexation of all of the land of the colony of Ma'ale Adumim, which is one of the biggest settlement colonies in the West Bank. So they want all the West Bank plus more. I mean, they want it all. That's all. That's been the national ideology for 80 years, of course. But yeah, I don't. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, what the response will be, and yeah, and the next steps. I mean, everything, as always, hinges on Gaza, and all eyes have to remain on
just
Gaza.
don't let up. Don't let
Yeah.
up. Be out there talking about Gaza every day, because as we heard from Asim, they have not lifted the siege. They've
No.
not stopped the starvation. They've not stopped. They've not allowed in the equipment that's needed to rebuild. They've
Yeah.
not allowed in shelters. None of this is happening so far.
Yeah.
You just can't let that fade into obscurity.
No, or be normalized, and go back to the way things were even before the genocide, which was already 16, 17 years of a blockade and siege.